This is episode 67 of the 99 Forever podcast. I'm Eric Friesen, and I'm very excited to have as my guest today the host of the Edmonton Oilers broadcasts on Sportsnet, Gene Principe. Gene, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. When I hear that number, I think of Benoit Pouliot, who used to play for the Oilers. And I'll tell you what, Eric, he was the fastest showerer, if that's a term, I have ever seen. He would walk into the room, and I'm telling you, now this is the old building, and 10 minutes later, he would be out the backside and around and departing. Like, honestly, there'd be times where he'd be the first guy in the room, and while we waited for the room, we could kind of see down towards where the old TV studio was. And before there were enough players in the room for the room to open, which usually is around six or so players, he would be showered and gone. Really good guy. I really enjoyed Benoit. He was a pretty quiet guy, but a nice guy, and the fastest when it came to leaving the ice, getting cleaned up, and on his way home.
Well, that's a great story just off the top of your head. And it's funny that you brought that up because it seems like it's happened several times where I've mentioned the number of the episode that we're on, and my guest has brought up a story of an Oilers player that they can remember from that jersey number. So that's great that you were able to share that story about Pouliot.
Yeah, no problem. Automatically, I haven't thought of Benoit Pouliot or his number in such a long time, so automatically it came to me.
Right. And I don't think too many Oilers have probably worn that. He might be the only one, actually. So
I think you might be right on that. I can't remember a 60. Oh, yeah, I don't remember that number being used by anybody other than him.
some
And
of
I
those
remember
numbers in
it
the
too.
60s.
That's my birth year, 67.
Okay. There you
I
go.
I, I know it, and I'm familiar with it as well.
Perfect. Well, Gene, we're getting close to the best time of year in oil country with the Stanley Cup playoff just days away. But before we discuss the Oilers, I'd first like to just hear a little about your own broadcast career and some of your memories of following the Oilers growing up. So, just as a kid in Edmonton, what was it like to be a hockey fan in the 1980s with the most talented and most exciting team ever assembled in your city?
Well, it was wonderful, and I think when the 1980s started, or we got into the early part of the 80s. Wayne Gretzky had arrived in 79, and his WHA season or NHL in 1979 after a start with the WHA. So I would say the WHA was something, I was quite young back then, that I was familiar with. I don't think the TV access certainly was back then what it is now, but I was familiar with the AFCO Cup and knew some of the Oilers as they made their way through the WHA, but then got to the NHL, and it was the biggest show in North America on ice. So between me getting a little older and the NHL arriving, it was kind of great timing to be a young person in the city, growing up and watching Wayne and Paul and Grant and Kevin and Andy and Mark and Yari and Essa and just a bunch of them and so on, and Charlie and so on and so forth. So yeah, it was fantastic. I mean, I'll never forget being at a Stanley Cup final game. What I have forgotten is how I got in there, which makes me think I snuck in, but I don't. I'm not 100% sure. I don't think a middle class family like ours would have been able to afford NHL Cup final tickets. But I remember seeing, God bless him, Don Whitman, who was a longtime caller of the Great Cup on CBC and longtime hockey play-by-play out of Winnipeg for Hockey Night in Canada. And I remember him walking downstairs from the catwalk where the press box was, and he was in his powder blue um,
Oh, the old Hockey
jacket,
Night in Canada
the old Hockey
jackets.
Night in Canada jacket. And I said, one day I want to work on that and wear that jacket. Now, I never got the jacket, but I have had the opportunity to work on Hockey Night in Canada. And so that's one of a kind of a broadcasting memory before I was a broadcaster. One other one I have was one time I was out, and hard as it is to believe, Wayne Gretzky was right beside me at this bar. I would have been, well, 18, 19. And the Oilers had acquired Mike Krushelnyski from Boston. Now, Eric, nowadays, fans probably within minutes of the media who are watching practice know who's in net, who's starting lineup. Is it 12 and 6? Is it 11 and 7? We never knew that back then. it just wasn't information that was released, or maybe there wasn't really an avenue for it. So anyways, I was beside Wayne, and it would have been mid to late September, and we were getting ready for a hockey draft with my buddies. And so I said to him, Wayne, Mike Krushelnyski, blah, blah, blah. He goes, he's actually going to be on my line, on my wing. I
Oh,
said,
wow.
oh, okay. So then about 6 rounds into our draft, I took Krushelnyski. Too much sort of, sometimes when they ridicule you, that's because they wish they had taken him. But who knew if it was going to turn out to be good? He ended up having an 88-point season, and I won the draft thanks to Wayne Gretzky, just being beside him at a bar. So, let alone watching them and enjoying what they provided on the ice, it was, and still, as Edmonton is small enough, and back then I think they were more accessible, that you could just bump into them kind of anywhere. And so, anyways, some neat memories. And what's really neat, Eric, is I have Wayne Gretzky's phone number, which next to helping be a part of producing 3 kids might be one of the most exciting things in my life. Wayne is the great one, not just because of his numbers, but because of the guy that he is. Truly a special person, an unbelievable special player. So it was a great time, I guess, is my long answer to wrap it up, to be in Edmonton during the 80s when the Oilers were doing what they were doing.
Oh, for sure. And that's a great story. I mean, how many kids at that age have the opportunity to rub shoulders with the greatest hockey player who ever lived? I can only imagine what that would have been like. I was born in '89, by the way, so I missed out on the dynasty years. I was alive for one Stanley Cup, but and I know you've had the opportunity to interview Wayne Gretzky, I would think quite a few times. I can remember one that you did when he was still a part of the organization, maybe 5 years ago or so on the Oilers website. But just having the chance to meet him, do you when you think ahead to your career all those years later, and getting to sit down and talk to the great one, I won't say starstruck, but do you ever have like a moment of like, wow, like this is what I'm doing for a living? I'm getting to, interview a hero of mine, the greatest hockey player ever.
Yeah, honestly, Eric, virtually every day I feel like that. I'm a Edmonton kid, born of 2 Italian immigrants who came to this country looking for a better place, to help raise and further not just their lives, but more importantly, their kids' lives. And my dad built houses for a living, and my mom sewed drapes. Far from being some extravagant lifestyle, but I love sports. Soccer was number one, and hockey was number two. But I love, playing tennis and playing basketball and volleyball. It didn't matter the sport. That's just kind of what I grew up to love, and so many of my friends were exactly that same way. And I'll never forget, we were in Nashville. By the way, good memory. That interview was in Tampa with Wayne Gretzky that we did for the
Right.
Oilers website. So good on you for remembering that. And yeah, I remember the first time I actually kind of interviewed Wayne. Certainly grew up watching him, meeting him at a bar or two. I remember you'd run into Esa Tikkanen and Craig Simpson and all these guys. I mean, they were out, right? At the time, you kind of think they're a bunch older than you, but like Craig Simpson and I are, I think, 2 weeks apart in age. The difference was, while I was, starting my career at 20 or 21, he was playing in the National Hockey League, and
Yeah.
winning Stanley Cup. So, but for sure, Wayne, unbelievable. Like, I can text Wayne and he replies, not because I'm any kind of special person. That's the kind of person that he is. When Connor reached 150 points, I text Wayne and said, "Hey, do you think I could get just kind of a quote?" And he's like, "Well, how about if we FaceTime?" And I was like,
Oh, wow.
oh my gosh. I go, as weird as this sounds, Wayne, we don't have the technical capabilities for an intermission to get your FaceTime sort of on air with us. So that was kind of weird, saying in in a way no to Wayne Gretzky.
Yeah.
He's like, "Oh, no problem, he's wonderful, and I remember we were in Nashville pre-pandemic when he worked for the organization, I would say 2018, and we had covered practice, and he knew who we were, we knew who he was, of course, but still sort of developing a working and relationship, and I guess friendship. And he just turned around to a bunch of us media, says, "Hey, who wants to go for lunch?" And I was like, oh my gosh, Wayne Gretzky just asked indirectly me to go for lunch. But the first time I kind of interviewed him was when the Winnipeg Jets were in the process. I was in Winnipeg. They were moving 95, 96, but we didn't have a lot of details. I was hosting the Jets games, and I was in my studio, which was an adjacent dressing room to the visiting dressing room when he played for the Kings. And he kind of poked his head through the door and said, "Do you mind if I sit here?" And I'm thinking, "Wayne, you could sit on my lap if you want. Doesn't matter to me. You can sit wherever you want. I love you, my friend, you know." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, sure." And it was so cool, Eric, no microphones, just him and I, me really not invading his time or privacy, but him asking me questions about Winnipeg and what's happening, are they moving, and all this while he was taping his stick. And just one of the cool moments, because of where I was, where I'm from, who he is, what he meant to me growing up and now into my 50s. So for sure, I do not take any of this for granted, and have to pinch myself sort of every day when I think of this small town Edmonton kid who was an average athlete ending up covering the best athletes in the world, or some up.
Yeah, and I mean that's a great story too. I love anytime you can hear I can hear a Gretzky story, as I'm sure you can guess from the name of my podcast. It's
Yes.
named after him. He's my hero. It's a life goal of mine to get to meet him. I was in the same room as him one time in
Oh,
2010. He and Gordie Howe were here for the Saskatoon Kinsman
yes.
dinner.
Yeah, I remember
So,
that. Yeah.
so for a kid making about $10 an hour at Safeway to save up for to go to that dinner was an expensive night, but I couldn't miss the opportunity to get the chance to at least hear my hero speak, and as well as Gordie Howe too. It was a legend, and just
Yeah, yeah, that's fantastic.
hearing you talk about how accessible Wayne was and asking you questions about yourself. When I was going to sports journalism school in Toronto 6 years ago, I happened to run into Darnell Nurse at a Blue Jays game,
Oh, yeah.
and he was waiting for his girlfriend. So he was just standing there, and I was waiting for someone as well. And we just ended up having a 10-minute conversation, and he would ask me questions about myself too. And I'm thinking like, wow, I'm the one that's the fan of you, and
Yeah.
you're being such like a kind person to like take this time out. So it's great to see that sort of tradition through the Oilers has been passed down.
Yeah, Darnell's a wonderful guy. He's one of my favorites. I mean, I feel like a dad with 20 plus kids. They're all your favorites, right? Sometimes more than others, depending on what's going on. But
Right.
Darnell's a real nice, his mom, Kathy, and dad, Richard. For some of your older listeners who would remember, his dad played in the CFL, was quite a special teams returner and wide receiver. And mom played basketball. Of course, we know Kia played basketball and still does, and the older sister plays basketball, and then the cousin plays hockey, and the uncle played in the NFL. So it's one of the most athletic groups of people you'll ever meet
Oh yeah.
anywhere, any time. But Darnell, I got a lot of time for Darnell because he's a real upbeat, positive, friendly, engaging young man.
That yeah, I would totally agree from my one interaction with him. And Gene, over the course of your career at Sportsnet, you've probably interviewed thousands of people, and Wayne Gretzky, as we already talked about, is a one that would stand out. Is there maybe one or two other individuals that you could say that was sort of like an interview that you really remember that you did?
Yeah, I think three, in fact. 2001, I went to Las Vegas, and John Ruiz was the belt holder in the heavyweight division, and he was going up against a boxer out of Halifax, for sure, Nova Scotia, and I think Halifax, Kirk Johnson. And Kirk never won that fight, and eventually didn't sort of maybe reach the expectations that people had for him. But I had a chance to interview Don King. Again, for some of your listeners who may not remember, Don King is like a promoter to end all promoters. In fact, he's sort of mimicked in I can't remember which Rocky. I don't know if it was Rocky
I think it's
Four,
Rocky Five, where
Five.
yeah.
Okay, yeah, Rocky Five. I get my Rockies mixed up. And honestly, Eric, I think I asked one question, and he went on and talked about maple syrup and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and Dudley Do Right and the snow. And I really wish I had that interview, because I would just watch it just to prove to myself that it actually happened. Because back then there was really no internet per se, and we weren't running things on the internet, and things would run on TV and sort of be gone. And oh, if I had that, I just would be one of my keepsakes because we're in Vegas and he's just rambling on, and I barely said anything. And then where I had a little more say were two interviews, Michael Jordan and Tiger Woods. Michael Jordan, I'll never forget. I was working in Toronto covering the Raptors, and back then at the Sky Dome, and maybe they do it now, but what's called Rogers Center, the bus would drive in underneath, and so they would park 100 feet from the dressing room kind of area. And Michael got off the bus, and I was with the cameraman, and he's like, okay, it's like now or never. And in the TV business, we call it a walk and talk.
Yeah.
So, we're walking and we're talking. It virtually explains itself. And honestly, I nearly peed myself with, I guess, excitement, nerves, uncertainty. It would have been, right at the height. It would have been like 95, I think, when
Yeah.
I did the interview. I worked in Toronto from 95 to 98. So that was like, wow, it's Michael Jordan, right? And then Tiger Woods, it was in Toronto as well. And he had sort of a kind of one of those sponsor events where he gets paid X amount of dollars and comes to the event. And I had a chance to interview him. And that would have been early two, like 2001, 2002, I would say. So he'd won his first Masters, I think 97, but I could be off. I'm not a huge golf fan, but I certainly recognize some golfers. And yeah, I'm interviewing Tiger Woods. So I think, along with Wayne, those would be sort of right off the top of my head, the three that would stand out. I'm sure if once we're done and I think about it further, I might come up with someone else, but that would have been, well, I did interview David Hasselhoff once.
Okay. Were you a big Baywatch fan in the 90s
Oh,
too?
was I? Yeah, not so much for David, I have to admit, but I enjoyed the beach scenes,
Yeah.
and also the Canadian kid on Beverly Hills 90210,
Jason Priestley.
Jason Priestley. Why I did some
I'm a
games in
90s kid, so
Calgary.
I remember a
You
lot
would
of
know
these.
right away, and
He was a big hockey fan too, right?
yes, yes, big hockey fan, and I interviewed him. He was in Calgary, just shooting a movie, which is what Hasselhoff was doing too. So, yeah, so those are some of the, just as we're talking here, my memories coming back to me. So there's a group, a handful of people that your
Wow.
listeners would certainly recognize.
Yeah, I definitely didn't think we'd be talking about Baywatch and Beverly Hills 90210 in this interview, but yeah, two of my favorite 90s shows. And after working in Winnipeg and Toronto for several years, what was the feeling like when you returned to Edmonton in 1998 and had the opportunity to cover the Oilers?
Well, I mean, I couldn't have asked for a better professional or personal move at that time in my life. 98, I would have been 31. And I was kind of at that point in my career where, it was either go home or go big. And Toronto was big, but I wanted bigger. It was about trying to get to, the US and get into a market there and start to work your way up. I was at the point in my broadcast time of 11 years that I really wanted to push, found an agent,
Hmm.
and then along came what was a news station at that time, A Channel, and they had been on the air 1 year, and then we're looking for a hockey host, and I was kind of, there was a lot going on back then. Someone had left TSN, and I had applied for the job, and I was, as I remember, like it was yesterday, they told me I was in their top 10. So top 10, not great if they're only hiring one person. So I got kind of you're not getting hired here. Then Sportsnet was actually coming on board, and I got we like your work, but so then there was this little old A channel, which was drawn to me by where it was, Edmonton, and what it was, hosting the Oiler games. Back then, I think we did 28 games. So away we go. And at the same time, my wife's from Winnipeg. She was pregnant with her first son and literally found out sort of right in the mix of figuring out what I wanted to do job wise. And yeah, so away we went. She was, well, it would have been August, and my son was born in February. And we moved back to Edmonton. She not from here, but me from here. And here we are in August. It'll be 25 years later. So it gave me a chance to be around my family, give me a chance to kind of that's my dream job.
Yeah.
Players we deal with often, Eric, it's my dream to play in major leagues, or the NBA or the NHL. Well, my dream was to cover the NHL and do so in Edmonton. So I couldn't have asked for really a better opportunity. And then after 3 years of doing that, Sportsnet really was taking over the regional rights. And the best, luckiest move of my life then was moving from A Channel to Sportsnet in 2001. Here was Sportsnet in '98 wouldn't hire me, or I felt like they weren't going to hire me. But in '01, they were looking for a hockey host, and yeah, the rest, at least to this point, is history.
Yeah, and you and I are similar in a sense because when I was a kid, I had the same dream as most Canadian kids to play in the NHL one day. But by the time I was about 12 years old, I realized that
Mm,
playing at the tier two level, I wasn't going to make it to
right.
the show. So I kind of figured that if I couldn't play hockey for a living, I'd love to have the opportunity to talk about it. So that was a similar dream that you and I had, and to obviously one day have the opportunity to cover the Oilers would be a dream come true for me as well. So I love to hear that story, and I remember watching because I was 12 in 2001 when you started, and have followed your career all the way through. And I'm when I think back to your time, like covering the Oilers, that run to the final in '06 must have been a career highlight for you. It's still the most fun I've ever had watching hockey. And, with last year being a close second, I just want to know, what are your best memories from that miracle run to the final 17 years ago?
Well, I remember a couple things. And by the way, when I was growing up, I tried out for the provincial soccer team, the U16 soccer team in Alberta. And I wasn't the first cut, but I definitely wasn't the last cut. And at that age, that's when I thought, okay, my dream and I was a house league hockey player, seventh defenseman. So that was out, but I was pretty good in soccer, but not good enough to continue to sort of elevate to the highest ranks. So that's when I said, like you, Eric, I went, hey, if I can't play sports, I want to cover them.
Mhm.
'06 was interesting. I actually, if you can believe this, I was supposed to go to the World Cup of Soccer in '06. So it was in Germany, and I was scheduled to go. But in the meantime, I was going to cover the Oilers because they were playing Detroit. Detroit had, I think, 126 points and
They'd
won the
be out well
President's
before.
Trophy. Right, right. And so I'm like, okay, they said just cover like the first round and then take some time off because the trip to Germany was 6 weeks. So okay, no problem. Well, they beat Detroit in six. All right, well, I'll cover the second round, and that's fine. It's exciting. And so the second round they lost the first two games, and I thought, oh, okay, here comes maybe the end of the run. Well, they came back and beat San Jose in six. So now we're into the conference final against Anaheim, and I'm thinking, okay, now we're starting to get kind of tight for time with the World Cup. Well, I had to be there in advance. Starts beginning of June till the first week of July. So now they're starting. My bosses are asking me, "What do you want to do?" And I'm like, "Well, this is a tough one. I love this. Fernando Pisani, my paisan from Edmonton, was on fire and was the talk of the town, along with
Yeah.
Chris Pronger, Dwayne Rollison, and Brian Smith, and Sean Horkoff, Alice Hemsky, all those guys. So it was really tough. And the other thing was, from a personal standpoint, we had three kids, 7 and under. So a 6 week road trip was long compared to popping in and out of town for 2 games here, one game there. You were home half the time. I said, I don't really know what to say. I mean, I'd like to do both. And they said, well, we can't. If they continue to win, it's one or the other. And I said, okay, you guys decide, because I think I'd rather you decide than me. And then they ended up deciding, there were three people deciding. 2-1 voted in favor of me staying instead of going to the World Cup. So they accredited somebody else who went to the World Cup. I ended up staying. The Oilers lost in game seven. Um, Italy, my country, lost, or won, I should say, the World Cup in '06. So it was a real weird time because I could have been over there covering the World Cup. I stayed here to cover the Stanley Cup. Oilers made it so far and lost. Italy made it all the way and won.
Mhm.
So it's not like, hey, it's kind of like winning the lottery. One was maybe worth 1 million, and one was worth 15 million. So it was a wonderful time and experience. I think a couple things that stick out: just the building, the city, the experience, the pandemonium, the excitement of just the city I remember my kids who hadn't been hockey fans to that point, two of them were kind of old enough, 5 and 7. They started asking about Ryan Smith and Chris Pronger and Fernando Pisani, and it just started a new generation of fans. I'll never forget Game 7, Ryan Smith walking off the ice and crying like he was, a 16-year-old kid or a
Yeah.
14-year-old kid. That definitely sticks in my mind. Another one that does was after they won the Anaheim series in 5. I was doing some live hits for Sportsnet, and I had a bit of a break. I was by the Zamboni, and I could see Craig McTavish sort of walk by the area, and then he walked back. I finished. He came out to me. He gave me a hug, and he said, "We did it. We did it." And I was thinking, I haven't done anything, but boy, do I ever feel like I did something when you talk to me like that. I felt like I blocked the shot, or maybe got in the way of a passing lane, or scored a big goal. So those are a couple of things that I can remember, along with the building shaking. It was kind of funny, Eric. I promise to wrap it up. I don't know why, but oftentimes I would be down sort of in the bowels of the old arena watching the tail end of the game, just kind of preparing for post game. And the TV that we had was about a 5 or 6 second delay. I knew that, and so did others, but that's kind of the way it was set up. And so it was hilarious when they would score late, or well, score anytime, but especially later in like a triple overtime or an overtime. The goal would happen, the building would shake, and then we'd see it on TV. So it was almost like living it twice. So yeah, lots of great memories of what was an unbelievable run.
Oh yeah, I mean, and you listed all the big names from that run. So many memories of watching those guys. They'll be heroes for me forever, especially Ryan Smith. I actually had the opportunity to interview him when I was an intern reporter in Lloydminster about 5 years
Nice.
ago, and that's still the highlight of my broadcasting career to get to meet him and talk to him. And he's as amazing as you could have ever expected from the guy. Just the most humble, down to earth uh, person. You would never know that he was a former NHL All Star if you didn't know who he was. So yeah, just a great guy and a highlight for me. So when I hear you talk about interviewing Gretzky, that was sort of like my experience getting to talk to Smitty.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I remember once Ryan. Uh, I guess my shoes weren't up to. He was a sharp dressed guy, and I walked in, and he said, "Gene, come here." I went over there, and I'm like, "What?" He goes, "Come on." I'm like, "What? What? You got to be better." What do you, I'm trying to think. What is he talking about? He goes, and he kind of pointed down. He goes, "Your shoes." He goes, "You got to be. They got to be. They got to look better than that. You're wearing this nice suit. Look at those shoes." So after that, I always would kind of keep. I'm not saying they're always as clean and as sharp looking as Ryan would like, but I'm always aware of my shoes and kind of how they match and how they look with the suit. So yeah, no, Ryan, I got oftentimes, Eric, I'll get asked, who's your favorite Oiler? Who's your favorite interview for an Oiler?
Right.
And I've got lots of them, but Ryan would be like right, in that top 3, top 5, whatever you want to say. And I'm sure there's some spots that are tied, right? Like the tie for first, a tie for second. So really genuinely nice, nice man.
For sure. And as great as that 20 or 2006 run is, let's hope that the Oilers can have a similar run this spring. And I just want to ask you a little bit about last night's game now, as the Oilers wrapped up the 2022-23 season with a 5-2 win over the San Jose Sharks at Rogers Place on Fran Appreciation Night. And with the victory, the Oilers recorded their fourth 50-win season in franchise history and matched the franchise record for longest winning streak at 9 games. They also broke the NHL record for highest success rate on the power play at 32.4%. Stuart Skinner broke Grant Fuhr's franchise record for wins by a rookie goalie with 29, and Zach Hyman and Derek Ryan each played in their 500th career game. Gene, with all the milestones and records that were set last night, was that just the exclamation mark on the one of the best regular seasons in franchise history?
Oh, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, and you could have kept going on and on the way it's been such a milestone season. It's been ridiculous how many milestones, how many career years and goals, assists, or points, or all of the three. The Stuart Skinner run, Darnell Nurse a career high in points, Zach Hyman and Ryan Nugent Hopkins and Evander Kane hitting 300, and then guys scoring their first goals as an Oiler, clean cost. And I mean, I've never seen anything like it, honestly. The way they finished not just, I think, and Eric, you and your listeners may know better than me, but I think they're 14-0-1 in their last
They
15 games.
are.
So to think about having 30 points available and having 29 of them and still not catching Vegas, it just seems outrageous. But credit Vegas for being able to continue at least a good enough pace to win the division and the conference. I don't know what to say. I mean, if you're a cup half full, you're going, couldn't be any better than this. And if you're cup half empty, you're going, oh my gosh, they can't get any better than this. So I've never. I mean, it's been unbelievable. And you start with McDavid, and it's truly a treat. People say, "What's the job like?" I'm like, I watch Connor McDavid every night. What do I'm not sure I could say much more than that, let alone Draisaitl and everybody else on the team. So I've had a wonderful, enjoyable season watching them. I mean, we're all kind of curious how this will go in the playoffs. I really do feel it's funny because I felt like they could win the Stanley Cup last year, but I wouldn't say it pales in comparison, but it feels way different this year. For me, I'm speaking for me. I can't speak for Leon and Connor and fans who are in and out of oil country. But for sure, there's just something about. I really think sometimes you say I think they can do that, but it's almost like I think they should do that. Uh, we'll have to wait to see the opponents after Los Angeles. Knock on wood. The potential injuries, the way they play, but I can't. It's hard for me to believe they could be set up any better than they are individually and as a team than what's going on right now, what's been going on this season, especially kind of like the last 3 months, but in particular, I would say the last 6 weeks.
Yeah. When you look at what they've done in the last 6 weeks, like you said, uh, I think even if you go back to early January when they were barely clinging to a wild card spot, how many people would have predicted they would finish 1 point back of first place in the Western Conference? It's just been an incredible second half of the season, and they've pretty much put that tough start to the year behind them very quickly and went on multiple 11-game point streaks, with the
Yeah.
most recent one reaching 15, as we said. So just an incredible run by the Oilers. And just speaking of McDavid for a second, he made history last weekend by reaching the 150-point plateau. And you actually tweeted out a picture of the puck he scored his 150th point with in San Jose. So McDavid became only the sixth player in NHL history to record 150 points in a single season, and the first since Mario Lemieux in 1995-96. And last night, he etched his name in the record books again when he became only the fifth player in NHL history to be the outright leader in goals, assists, and points in a single season, and the first since Wayne Gretzky in 1986-87. Gene, McDavid has just continued to improve upon his offensive production each year since he entered the league in 2015. But did you ever foresee him finishing north of 150 points and winning the scoring title by this wide of a margin?
I would be telling a bit of a fib if someone said before the season how many points you think McDavid could get. If I remember correctly, I think I was in the 130, maybe up to 140, because I always see Leon as being about, not always, but potentially at 20, about 20 points less
Yeah.
than Connor, kind of in there. So I thought, you know what, to me, Leon's 100 points, easy. So Connor's 120, at 10, 110, 130. Maybe it's 115 or 135, somewhere in that vicinity, possibly up to 140, possibly, but no. And I'm not saying that was a ridiculous estimation, but I would think that was probably on the higher end. I don't know. I'm not sure if some said that he could hit 150, but I mean, unbelievable. Like it
It feels like we're watching almost an era gone by of these kind of totals. I didn't know if I'd ever see a 150-point scorer in the NHL in my time as a fan, because by the time that I was fully following the NHL, they were in the dead puck era by then. So
yeah,
the incredible point totals of the 80s and early 90s were sort of a thing of the past by then. So even to see the leading scorer get into the low hundreds, that was sort of what you expected the top players in the league to do. But to see Leon finish with 128 as well, Connor, of course, getting 153, Nugent Hopkins finishing with 104. It just, the list goes on and on. We've been treated to such great hockey, and I think this is the closest that Edmonton has seen to those glory teams in the 1980s in the past 30 years.
Oh yeah, and I mean I don't know what I don't know. Does he have a 170-point season in him or five more of 150? I remember that stretch where Wayne in 5 years, 5 seasons, had over 1,000 points, 4 seasons 200 plus, and then that one season he only had 196. Like, so I don't know if we're at the start of a run where Connor gets 153 and 148 and 161, or I guess we'll have to see. But with him, never say never, because I don't even know what I'm not sure if he has a number in mind, but maybe he surprised himself a bit. Maybe he didn't. I don't know when you get into that stratosphere of numbers. And it did remind me of the days where, and it could have been Wayne, could have been Mario, others who would pile up points, but in particular those two, and Wayne more because I watched Wayne
Right.
more often than Mario. But they'd win, and you go, "Oh my gosh, he had 4 points." And he didn't even like you hardly noticed him. And the San Jose game I thought was kind of like that. Now he got his 150 points, so of course we were very excited about covering that. But didn't seem like he had his Connor McDavid A game, and yet the game finished and he had 3 points. So it's been obviously a treat. And I this year more than ever. I don't know why. Maybe because of the season he's had. Maybe because he's a year older and I'm a year older. But I kind of thought, you know what? I wouldn't mind retiring when Connor retires, because I'm not sure I would be wanted to go through another rebuild. I don't know how many more years Connor would play. I would think at 26, to me, he's a guy that would play till he's 35, almost minimum, knock on wood, barring any kind of serious injuries. So that might work timing wise. Hopefully it gives me a heads up and that I'm still here. And if that's the case, we do the old I'll interview him last time, mic drop. So long, everybody. He's retired and I'm retired. Enjoy, the new captain and whoever the new host will be on Sportsnet.
There you go. And I don't know if he has these numbers in mind either, but I've talked about this on previous episodes that there's a couple things I really would like Connor to achieve from an individual standpoint. Of course, from a team perspective, winning the Stanley Cup is the ultimate goal, and hopefully he'll be adding one in a couple months here. But I'd like to see him become only the second player to hit 2,000 career points.
Yeah.
And, if he has another 150-point season next year, he's already at 1,000 by age 27. And the question is, can he get another 1,000 after 27? And I think if he plays closer to 40, let's even say he does play to 40, that gives him 13 years to get 1,000 more points. I really believe if he's averaging, say, 125 for the next 4 or 5 years, that gives him a good shot in his 30s to be just a point per game player through and have a realistic chance of getting there. And the other one would be, how close can he get to Gretzky's record of 10 Art Ross trophies? He's halfway there as of right now.
I know.
I don't know if he's got.
I was heartbroken when he didn't get to, well, first the rookie season, he couldn't get to 100, but then when he finished at 97
in the pandemic here,
and he had missed a couple games, and so he didn't get to 100.
I know that was a tough one too.
I remember as a kid, Glenn Anderson was my favorite player, and he got to 99 one year. He didn't get to 100. I was so disappointed. I guess for him, and just that he didn't get there. He was so close.
But I believe he had 2 other 100-point seasons as well.
And Glenn's the kind of guy, I don't think numbers matter to him. He finished with 498 goals.
Yeah.
I think he could have come back and played somewhere for 2 goals. But yeah, I'm a big fan of that sort of that streak of 100 points every season for X amount, or Art Ross trophies. And I'm with you. I would love to see him, to get to 2,000 would be, incredible. But when you lay it out like that, you got to be really good for a really long time
and healthy.
It's amazing and healthy, right? And he's putting up incredible numbers. So if he, I would say next year I'm with you, because he finished the season just over 850, right? 852, 853, somewhere in there.
He's exactly at 850, so he needs 150 on the dot to hit 1,000 next year.
So that'll be something he'll be chasing, knock on wood, as you said, that he's healthy. So then let's say it's another 150. He's at 1,000 points. He's 27.
Hmm.
Then that next year be 28. So I think he's going to continue. I think he can get 120 points
For
for
five
at least
years.
5 more
That's
years. So now
600
you're at
more points.
600.
Yeah.
Now that leaves you at 32, 33,
That's
with 500
1,600
more to
points.
go,
Yeah.
right? So, or 400 more to
Yeah.
go. So, you know, very possible, but my gosh, like that shows you how good you have to be and for how long. It is not easy to be at the top of your game. And that's, the old story like Wayne when he was retiring and his dad said, "Are you sure, Wayne?" He goes, "Dad, right? I used to have 9 goals in a weekend. Now I got nine
Yeah.
goals in a
I
season."
remember that quote
It's a
too, when
wonderful
that when he
story.
knew that he was time to
Yeah.
retire.
It's a wonderful story, right? And at the end,
Yeah.
Wayne was still, I think his final season, he still was at a point per game. 2 seasons before that, or three, he was at less than a point per game. He was injured.
He
Wayne
led the
ended
league
up,
in assists in his second last season.
there you go. See, so um, he still had it. He still could have played. But when you think of it, he was 38. Like he played a long time. And it's funny now when you talk to him about alumni games or outdoor games that have, the part of it that deals with the legends of the game. And he's like, "I'm done." Like, Wayne's not out skating 3 times a week.
No.
Imagine how many hours he spent on skates. Oh my gosh. So he's finished,
Yeah.
regarding playing. He's who he is and does a wonderful job on television. And so I would love to see Connor kind of get to that kind of stage in his career where he starts to be in all of those television graphics where it's consecutive 100-point seasons or winners of the Art Ross or like I think Bobby Orr, if I'm not mistaken, I think he won 7 or 8 straight Norris trophies.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I understand back in the day there weren't 32 teams, but he was the defense Connor McDavid. And then Paul Coffey, who to me, I didn't watch Bobby Orr at the height of his career. I kind of caught him at the tail end. He
Hmm.
finished in Chicago. But Paul Coffey to me is, well, top 10, 15 player all time, top 3, 4 defenseman, if not
I
second
think he's
overall for
very
me. So
underrated for
I
one of the
agree.
greatest defensemen. And I had the chance to meet him in Saskatoon about 10 years ago too
Nice.
at another dinner where he was here, and a great guy, Grant Fear too. Grant Fear, I still consider the nicest pro athlete I've ever met.
Yeah, great
And
guy, Grant.
yeah, fantastic person. But I guess just the last thing I want to ask you, and I didn't plan on asking you this, but you sparked a question for me. The Heritage Classic is coming back to Edmonton next
Yeah.
fall. First time in 20 years. You'd think with a player like McDavid that the Oilers would be in one of those outdoor games every year and have the chance to showcase him as much as possible. They were at one in the fall of 2016 in Winnipeg, which I had the chance to go to, and it's the only time that I've ever seen Wayne Gretzky play live was in that alumni game. So it was an opportunity that I
Great.
couldn't miss. And I didn't know that if I'd have another chance. So my last sort of question for you is for the upcoming Heritage Classic in 2023, we're now 7 years on even from that 2016 game. How many of the 80s legends do you expect will participate in the alumni game? And do you think
Wow.
we will see Gretzky there, or will he just be sort of an ambassador for the event?
That's a great question. I mean, I think Wayne, if anything, will put him back on skates. That would be it. I think Messi. I think some of these guys, like all of us, I guess, when we have a challenge or an opportunity in front of us, you kind of rise to the occasion, and I think that would be the case for Wayne and Mark. Well, Mark, by the way, looks. I mean, he looks like he could still play. And Glenn Anderson, Paul Coffey. Like I know Paul does still plays. He's around the Oilers. He's like an advisor for the team, and he still laces the skates up. And the goalies might be a little more challenging for the Fuhrers or the Mogs. Maybe Bill Ranford comes back from the 1990 Cup championship. But I think that when you're talking about 2023. Wayne is 62, Mark, I think is 61, 62. Like everybody is now
Yeah.
kind of in that moving into the early mid. I know Kevin Lowe is going to be 64 right away. So I think this might be, Eric, that last sort of when you get these guys together and
Mhm.
you get them on the ice together and they have a bit of a last hurrah, um, considering the game, the setting, the location. I think it's going to be wonderful. I remember the one in '03. Oh, was that cold? Yikes. My gosh. In fact, my wife, I was able to get a couple tickets. She went with a friend and they sat through both games.
Oh, wow.
And the first game wasn't bad because it was sunny. And but the second game, I mean, it was freezing. So I don't believe it's going to be that cold this
They
time
made a
around.
better decision having it a month earlier this time
Yes,
too.
yes, I would agree. So it's going to be a wonderful time to have all of these people and players stroll back into the city and to have Connor McDavid as the centerpiece of the whole thing, along with Draisaitl and the team that they have. It's going to be wonderful. And, it'll be kind of not the end of an era, but because of, I think, the age of those boys on the bus, might be the last time ice wise you get them, as many as them together, to be on there and play in the form of an alumni group. So be a ton of fun.
Oh, definitely. And I plan on being there in October for that too. So, Gene, I just want to say thank you again for taking the time to be on the show today. It's been just a true pleasure to get to talk to you. You were one of my inspirations to get into the sports broadcasting industry from a young age. And you've had so many great stories about Gretzky and the 80s legends and the '06 run. And just, it's just been a great opportunity to talk to you. So I just want to say thank you again for taking the time.
Yeah, you know what? You're welcome. Been my pleasure. Lots of fun, Eric.
For sure. And I'm hoping that you'll have a long spring ahead of you of covering the Oilers yet.
Me too, buddy.
Okay. So for Gene Principe, I'm Eric Friesen. This has been the 99 Forever podcast. We're out.